time. All right, so I'm going to repeat the whole, please fill out the form. I know we're but we really appreciate this if you can do that. If you fill out the electronic one, I am actually live graphing it on our back end, so we can trace stuff that way. So we do read them, we do look at them, we do process them, we do make changes because of them. So we are a data-driven organization, which is pretty cool. Also, I'm getting a plug-in for the end of the day. So not only will Mr. Jaquith be here for this talk, he's going to be one of our guests at Wait, Don't Pwn Me.
I think the word is victim is the word you're looking for,
maybe victim too, but he'll be playing for you if you sign up to be a volunteer. So we're going to pick randomly from whoever clicked the tweet button on our main page for Wait, Don't Pwn Me. We're giving away prizes for all sorts of stuff. You might get questions, you might get him to answer questions for you. So they're pretty good prizes as well.
Use this after all.
Okay. So, not only is he CTO at SilverSky, not only has he been an epic analyst in past, he's the godfather of security metrics, author of the book on security metrics as well too. I'm going to hand it over to Andrew.
Thanks, Bob. All right, thanks everybody for coming. I know I'm probably the last thing between this and a very entertaining Wait, Don't Pwn Me panel. So, anyway, thanks for coming. I wanted to do a talk. I got about 45 minutes. We're going to try and make this interactive. It's a small group, and I know you probably got a lot of questions. But this is about something we do at SilverSky. It's the what we call the Financial Services Threat Report, and it's an exercise in essentially mining our own data about the security of our customers. So I've got a trivial kind of agenda here, which is 4 parts. I'm going to give you the briefest of advertising for us, not so much because I want to sell you something. I mean, I do, but all of us are always selling, right? But more just to give you a sense of context to how we look at this thing, how we got into the market, and kind of what we do, more as an aid to the qualifications to talk on this today. I'll then talk about the actual Financial Services Threat Report. We unveiled it a couple weeks ago. It was pretty well received. We had a couple hundred folks on the webinar. Our customers tell us they get a lot of value out of it. I'm going to give the Cliff Notes version of it. So I've removed all the marketing fluff and the filler, and I'm going to go right to the headlines and see if we can go through it quick. Since I've only got 45 minutes, I'm going to keep that brief-ish. We're then going to talk about data sources and methods, so how we actually make it. So I've been sort of joking to my colleagues internally. I said, where are you going today? I said, well, I'm going to do a presentation. I'm going to give the folks that don't work here a tour of the sausage factory, and that's really what this is. It's really to give you a sense of how we make some of this. I have no idea about whether the Symantec folks make their own reports this way or not, but this happens to be our version of sausage, and whether or not it's hygienic, you get to tell me. So, and then we're going to stop with what we've learned and where we could be going, and there's going to be some things in here that Mr. Rudis is going to find thrilling. All right, so first, real brief, SilverSky, who we are. We're a cloud-based security services provider. Boston is actually our R&D hub, so we have an office down on Broad Street, right near the Faneuil Hall, where we have about 35 folks. Most of them are engineers, a couple of people like me or not. But we're all over the U.S. We've got about 400 people, about 8 different offices, and we have 3 major lines of business. Our network security services, so traditional managed security services, so UTM monitoring and management, web security, SIM services. We've got email protection that provides email DLP, compliance-related archiving for customers that have an e-discovery obligation or need to comply with regulations. And something we're introducing later this month called target attack protection. It's really about mining email as a key threat vector. And our third major line of business is around essentially hosting. So managed Exchange, SharePoint, Link. We have a mobile device management add-on software that's through partnership with AirWatch. So it's all underpinned by our consulting and professional services. So we've got about 6,000 customers, pretty good critical mass in financial services, and it's been an interesting place to be. I used to be an analyst. I came to SilverSky about 3.5 years ago. So just to give you a sense of our SOC, we have 3 SOCs. Our primary one is in Raleigh. We have another SOC in Manila, and we have a third SOC in Fort Lauderdale. And we have about 60 SOC analysts on staff or thereabouts, engineering, SOC analysts and engineers. We kind of count them together. So we protect about $500 billion in financial assets. Those are the assets under management for our banking customers, of which there are about 1,800 or so. Typically on a typical month basis, we process about 15 billion raw events, and we see about 300,000 security alerts alerts, all of which are reviewed by an analyst. Most of them are reconnaissance or not very interesting. They're perhaps information leakage, but they're not compromises. But some of them are, and we escalate them to customers, and we work with them to close the ticket. So this is the little infographic of how it is. This does not represent reality. It's more how we choose to portray it. But we have perimeter devices, UTM devices like firewalls. We have agents that are sitting on our customers' key workload servers and so forth. Occasionally desktops as well. All that gets fed up into a SIM. I'll talk about that in a sec. When we have an incident and we have something that we need to report on, we classify it into 4 levels. We're going to add a 5th, which I'm going to talk about towards the end of the presentation. But there's essentially level 0. It's essentially something that got fed automatically to a human analyst from our SIM. Typically, if it stops at level 0, it means that it's basically harmless. Level 1 is an informational incident. It's a scanning incident. Sometimes it's typically reconnaissance. A lot of the ping sweeps that we see sort of stop at level 1, and that's where they go. Level 2 is something where we have evidence, usually of a network nature, that there was a compromise. So we think that an asset inside a company actually got compromised, and this is through, shall we say, signals intelligence, your classic network-style detection of a desktop calling out to a botnet or a known command and control network. And so level 3 is where we're really sure we've got a live one, and we've got a telltale signature that indicates that somebody's been owned. So that's how we do it. In terms of our threat report, we look at these last 2 in terms of the metrics we report to customers. So we refer this as likely and confirmed compromises. So the figures I'm going to show you are in that. So let's talk about the actual report and some of the results. I'm going to breeze through this really quick because I think that sort of how we do it and the methods are at least as interesting as the results themselves. Why do we do it in financial services? Part of it is we've got critical mass. We've got about 1,800 customers or so. Financial services is also one of those industries they spend a lot of money on security, and the attackers know this. So it's a pretty good crystal ball for what many customers outside financial services are going to see in the near-term future. So we like it for lots of reasons. It's an interesting space to study. The other thing, and this is a little subtler, is that benchmarking financial services is a little easier. All of the information about things like employees, the number of offices they have, the assets under management, this is all public record. So if you like to benchmark, and I do, I like to cut things by size of company and number of employees and geography and things like that. This is all very easy to get for this sector because it's a regulated sector. It's a little harder to get in the general space. For example, there are around 12,000 financial institutions in the country, and they all report on either a monthly or a quarterly basis all of their key metrics to the FDIC and the government. We think, and we don't know. Somebody please tell me if we're drinking our own champagne here, but we think we're the only security firm that actually reports the way we do about compromises to customers. We think that's true. Bob's shaking his head yes, so that's cool. We've done 4 of these since 2012. We do them every 6 months. They're somewhat labor intensive, which we'll talk about, and we're going to be gearing up to do a 5th pretty soon. So just to give you some highlights, we looked at, we boiled down those 90 billion incidents into about 1.9 million security alerts, all on an automated basis. We investigated 72,000 potential incidents, and it resulted in 1,556 compromises over a 6-month period. So if you want to look at sort of a compression ratio, it's about 58 million raw events equates to 1 bona fide incident. So that's a lot of data to boil down. Just a couple of headlines. We found about 1,500 or so likely and confirmed compromises, those level 2 and level 3s. It affected almost 400 institutions. That was down a little bit. And about 40% of these banking and financial institution customers were compromised at least once or had one of these level 2 or level 3 incidents. So a little not quite as good as a coin flip, but that's the way I kind of portray it, is if you work in a bank or a credit union, if you flip a coin, it's likely they got owned over the last 6 months. I'm going to talk about some of the other stuff later. You can find the report on our website. You can just look at our blog. That's where we do it. We don't have a long form PDF. It's really just a long blog post for it. We like to do some time trending, so we observed a couple things in the 6-month period. So, for example, we quantified the number of incidents on a month-by-month basis. You can see there's a nice little drop in the late summertime, followed by a steady increase. There were a couple things that happened in that time frame. One of them was the Russian author of the black hole exploit kit was arrested and was essentially taken out of circulation. And we do think that that had some effect in terms of the numbers that we see. The other thing is that if you look at from a historical standpoint, there's a lot of period over period increases and decreases. But what we've seen is that the compromises we did see have been increasing back to historical highs. So the way we interpret this is you can take a bad actor out of the security ecosystem, but another one's going to take his place. This is a fun chart that we put together. It's really a little bit like a histogram. It's really a bin diagram trying to indicate what percentage of customers had a certain number of incidents. So if you look at I mentioned to you that 42% of institutions had at least one compromise or one of these incidents, down from 47%. That's this first column here. And if you go all the way out, you can see that somebody had over 40. And if you look at the chart here of the most compromised institutions, that's looking out at the long end of the tail here. So you can see that we had one mid-sized credit union, and the names, of course, have been disguised to protect the innocent, had over 42 of these incidents in a 6-month basis. And then the number 10, so in from the right, had 17. But you can see for the most part that your typical customer only has a couple, at least what we've been able to detect, and that's a key point here. The other point that's interesting for me is we work with a lot of credit unions, and credit unions are typically very under-resourced. They're nonprofits. They're under pressure. It's not a real big surprise that even though there are less credit unions than banks in the country, they're overrepresented in terms of the data that we see here. A couple other, yeah, Patrick.
So what does an incident actually mean? I mean, you had evidence of a compromise, so
Yep.
something happened. Do you have any metric for the kind of impact that particular incident might have had?
Yeah, good questions. Patrick wants to know essentially what constitutes an incident. When we look at the likely or confirmed compromise, the likely means we've got some evidence, typically network information that has a telltale signature that looks like a compromise to a machine. The level 3, which is the confirm, means that we've had communication with the customer, and it does indeed appear that there's been an affected asset. What we don't have, and this is in the wish list, and I'm going to talk about this at the end, okay. What we don't have is any way of quantifying the size of it or the impact. Yeah, and that's because we don't control the customer's infrastructure, right? So we know about what's going on, but we don't manage their desktops, for instance. So we really have no idea the exact extent of it. But that's something we want to do, and so good question. You've teed me up for later. A couple other things we do kind of a period over period trend here, so you can see that this is cut by asset size. So the institutions they all file what assets they have under management. So we again break them into buckets. You can see here the small institution has on average 3. It increased to 4 in the second half of last year, and for the mid-size and large stayed about the same. And we interpret this in a couple different ways. It's hard to know from a number standpoint what it really means, other than to say that it's probably pretty stable. We have a couple hypotheses on these. One of them is that for the smaller institutions that this has increased a little bit because that they're a little less under-resourced, the threat environment might be getting more dangerous, and so forth. But we try to keep a look at this. The other lesser appreciated part of this, and we're going to try and measure this at a later point, is whether this is an indicator about our own efforts. If you believe the threat environment is at least constant or getting nastier, shouldn't those numbers be going up? Are the defenders really getting better? Is it a learning effect? We're not really sure. We're not sure yet. So.
Or are they getting unexpected?
Or the attackers being more sneaky. Yeah. So these are all really good questions, and we try not to generalize too much. Well, we do generalize a little bit, but it's always a bit of a balancing act on this. Everybody does one of these country maps. Sorry, we did one too. We don't take this too seriously. I sort of downplay this a lot when I talk about it. We're not naming and shaming countries. We're not telling you to move from the US because it's too dangerous or anything like that, like Sophos does. We're really just trying to give an indicator of some of these source port addresses. So we did the same thing. One of the things we do that is a little bit different is we use a metric called the Simpson Index of Diversity. How many of you folks have heard of it? Okay, so the Simpson Index is a way of understanding concentration, and it's actually related to something called the, bear with me, the Hirschman-Herfindahl Index, or the HH Index, which is used by the Department of Justice to understand whether mergers are going to be anti-competitive. But it's basically the same formula. And so when the DOJ looks at a merger opportunity, they square the market shares of the participants, and they add it up and they come up with a number. And the higher the number, the more concentrated the market is, on the theory that if you've got a lot of market share, your market power is amplified. So you add up the squares of the share, you add it up, you get a number, and the diversity is essentially the inverse of that. So what you end up with is a number from 0 to 1 that indicates whether in this case, these IP addresses are very diverse, or these countries are very diverse, or whether they're very concentrated. And you can see here, we use this as a fun fact as opposed to something we're super serious about, but we noted that, for example, that the diversity index decreased in the second half, and we've been looking at this for the last three periods or so. So you're nodding your head. Is that good?
I come from economics background as well.
Yeah, it's a neat. It was one of those. I actually was thinking about it. I'm like, because I'm in economics. I have an economics degree, and so it popped in my head. I'm like, could we do this? And it turned out the Simpson folks, Mr. Simpson, whoever that was, Homer Simpson, whoever invented the index, had thought about this already. Yeah.
Have you tried correlating this data against known anonymizing proxy networks like Tor and/or other VPN services? Because I look at this map and I see, yeah, that's exactly where they're located.
Yeah.
So you actually could have your attacks actually originating in China or being launched from the United States.
So it's a really good question, and to be just the question for the recorder was, have we correlated this against anonymizing proxies that run Tor and things like that? And the answer is we haven't. It's a good question. That's one of the reasons I don't take these exhibits very seriously. And every time a certain security vendor says we're going to name and shame country X, Y, and Z, that I usually make fun of them, usually over Twitter, because for this kind of reason. So we haven't done it. It's a good idea. We might do it. We might not. I don't know. It's gonna as with everything else, it depends on how much time we got. We do the other thing we also did is we did an analysis of some of the threats, and similar to the IP address countries, we did a diversity metric on this one as well. And you can see that that things have changed a little bit. So this is, we're trying to look at period over period. This on the right is the current period, the one is the previous. You can see here that the thing that we detected the most was this ZMEU vulnerability scan, which is a PHP myadmin exploit. Now that's not going to be too harmful with a lot of customers, but it was nonetheless the thing that we saw the most, and we saw a lot of it in the 6 months. I mentioned the black hole just dropping right off the map. In the first 6 months of 2013, it was like 11%. It was the #1 thing that we saw. In the second half, it just slid right to the bottom, practically. So one thing we did I point this out as a exhibit guy, somebody who likes to think of interesting graphics and try to put them together, was, could we try and depict the flux in the top 10? Because it's a way of illustrating that the threat environment changes a whole lot. And so we put together this subway map. It's an incredibly tortured Excel graph. And we tried to illustrate how things have been changing place. So you can see here that black hole was popping along, number one, and then it just dove to number 9. You can see that some of these others, like Dark Leech, came out of nowhere to become number 2 in the first half. So again, we do this more as a way of understanding the change in the environment. It's not that fun to put together, but it's not that hard either. It's just a lot of Excel diddling. Okay, so that's the report, and there's a lot of front and back matter to it. There's probably some narrative. I probably whizzed through the numbers really quickly, but again, I use it as a way of showing kind of what we're trying to collect and what we're doing. So let's talk about the sausage factory. How do we make this thing? So really, there's a lot of different ways that people look at this. Those of you who consider yourselves data scientists, anybody who's got their sort of white lab, I know Mr. Rudis does, there's a couple steps that you typically go through, and I don't claim to be in that category, but just thinking about it logically, what do? Well, we got to collect the data first. That's done over a 6-month period through the process that I'm about to describe. It's that collection of 60 analysts and engineers that are working on a day in, day out basis to find correlations, detect potential incidents, talk to customers, close out tickets. We cleanse it. So at the beginning of the reporting period, my colleague Dr. Grace Zhang, who works in our Raleigh office, actually does an extract. She gets a spreadsheet extract out of our ticketing system and starts to go to work. That includes a lot of normalization of different things. We'll talk about that in a minute. We analyze it, so Grace usually spends about a week just hitting Excel hard and really making sure that the data is nice and clean, analyzing it, summing things. We put some exhibits together. That's Grace and I both do that. She does an initial cut. I do the, shall we say, the presentation ready piece, and then we go ahead and build the presentation and write the report. So it's depending on how you look at it, it's probably about 6 months of ongoing work and about 2.5 weeks of on and off, occasionally painful work to actually put this together. From an architecture standpoint, I should probably mention a little bit about how we make this. So we have about 2,400 or so sources, and it includes things like Cisco and FortiGate. We've got a lot of FortiGate appliances that we manage, about 2,000 plus, some Palo Alto, semantic endpoints, lots of syslog sources. Those all go into this somewhat convoluted, well, I shouldn't say convoluted because it exists for a good reason, but it initially goes into a syslog cluster. These are heavily load balanced. There's a lot of them. And then it goes through a step of parsing the data, normalizing what's in it, putting a taxonomy on the data, tagging things, and then routing an event up to this analysis tier where it's going to be evaluated. You'll do that's where the correlations are applied. It'll look up dynamic lists that we keep, and we keep quite a few of them. We'll evaluate a threat, and then it'll assign a risk score from 0 to 900, 900 being the highest. And depending on that, it then gets escalated to the actual SIM. So when that happens, and we have a ticket that's been created, it automatically, when there's something that is interesting enough to be acted on, we automatically create a ticket in Footprints. And Footprints is it's a typical help desk software package that's made by Numara, which is now part of BMC, I think. And we have a lot of data in the system. The incident database itself has 6.5 million rows in it. So, which makes it interesting to query, as I found out this morning. It takes about an hour. And this is how we process that 500 million or so events a day. A lot of them get discarded. We don't keep it kicking around, boil it down to 80 million events. So it's a lot of architecture. I'm definitely not the expert. I don't run it. I don't tune it. We have folks that are very, very good at this, that know how to work it. I mentioned the process it goes through. You normalize all your source and target ports, et cetera, taxonomize it, create alerts, risk score it, route it, create the ticket. So that's the architecture. What do we do when we go through this process of creating the report? Well, first we collect the data, and that's this part that I mentioned here. So on an ongoing basis, information flows through the system. It gets parsed, it gets normalized, mapped, correlated, and risk weighted, and then those tickets are automatically created. And our analysts will then reach out to a customer. If we think that there's an incident, they'll talk to them, they'll find out if it is, it gets marked up in the ticket, and then eventually closed. So that's what we do on an ongoing basis. When it's time to make the donuts, which is to say the report, we go through a different process. So we get a raw extract, and then we add some things to it. So we add some things, we add some data that we extract from Salesforce, which is our Salesforce management system. It includes things like unique identifiers for financial institutions, the NCUA or FDIC numbers. And oftentimes we go directly to the FDIC or NCUA to update the asset information, because again, this is how we understand how big they are. So what we get out of this is an enriched data set, and I like the concept of enriching data. You start with the raw, you add things to it, you get something that's a little bit better out of it. It's like adding vegetables to a stew, I suppose. So once we do that, after that data collection process, we get about a dozen or so fields that go into this Excel spreadsheet. So the organization, the ticket number, signature information. If it came from a FortiGate, for example, what is that big long string that constitutes the signature that we mapped on? What level is it? That 0 to 3, so 3 being the highest, confirmed compromise, 2 being the lowest. The risk score that I mentioned, the tag ID, which is a unique customer identifier, the title of the event, classification. Ultimately, the analyst will have created some kind of disposition about what it was, whether it was an outbreak or a reconnaissance incident, source and destination kind of stuff. So all that goes into that initial snapshot. What we also do after that, and this is when I say we, I really mean Grace, she then takes the information and adds in some of the customer information. So we add in that asset information, and then we put them into a bin, a small, medium, and large institution based on asset size. We include the number of employees, although we're not doing anything with it at the moment, and then we bucket it into a month. We take all the incidents, we put them into one of the 6 months of the period so that we can then make nice fancy charts and graphs on it. So that's the, and what we get out of this, of course, is an Excel spreadsheet. I should say, oh, the shame. But that's what we do. You know, as with a lot of prototyping exercises, you start doing this, and then it has its own gravity or its own momentum, and you keep doing it, even though it's not necessarily the best instrument to do it in. But today we're still doing it in Excel. Yeah?
So can you talk a little more about this aggregate risk score of 0 to 900?
Yeah.
It just
Yeah, so question on the floor is what's this aggregate risk score thing?
0 to 900 too, that's scale.
Yeah, so I actually can't explain it. What I do know is that a bigger number is a lot worse than a smaller number.
Okay.
So it's assigned by the SIM.
Okay.
And it relates to a couple different things. You know, if there's a positive hit on a correlation, you know, if we have a known command and control network, you know, that just gets a really high score right away. It's think of it almost as like a spam scoring system.
Right.
But beyond that, since I'm not Rick Westmoreland, who's our level 3 analyst who cares and feeds this thing, I can't tell you other than to say that higher is bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do your customers ever ask you that question?
No.
Seriously?
They don't. Our customers do not ask us about the risk score.
They'd be happy.
You know, they could, but they'd probably be upset that we missed some compromises.
Yeah.
Because that's how we rate when we assign an evaluation.
Do you even suspect it's like logarithmic or linear or?
It's just a number. Yeah.
Our culture loves numbers.
It's just a number.
My cholesterol is.
But businesses only care about red, green, or yellow.
Yeah. So that number is used to get us to red, green, or yellow. How's that?
I was afraid of that.
I know. It's the way things work, right? If you do a spam check, you know, you've got multiple engines that are voting on whether a message is spam, and one guy thinks it's spam and another guy doesn't. At a certain point, you sort of look at the vote and you say, this thing looks like spam. And that's a similar process to what we use here. I think there's a question in the back.
Yeah, I guess, still, not to harp on the aggregate risk score thing, but in terms of a customer actually, you know, turning out that they have a real incident, is there any sort of feedback that goes back and looks at the assigned aggregate risk scores for what you did detect, and are they adjusted based on whether or not it was a real thing?
Nope. It's a great idea, though. I'm not trying to be glib about it. I actually think that's a good idea. Okay, more sausage making, and these are all questions that are very good so far. What do we do? So once we do the data collection, we do the analysis, right? So first we eliminate the false positives. Now the analysts have already done this to an extent because when they touch a ticket, they can classify it as a false positive. But there are still, for the purposes of our report, there are still things that may show up as a potential incident, but really aren't that important for purposes of understanding whether a customer actually had compromised. So Grace goes through and manually weeds through about 1,200 to 1,600 tickets over that 6-month span and determines whether or not it really is something that we have to worry about. And then we normalize the threats. We get a ticket information from our SIM, and that has the title of what the threat is. It includes typically a customer tag, but actually extracting, yup, this thing was black hole, or this thing was darkly, or whatever, that has to be done through a combination of regular expressions and elbow grease. And this is one of the things we're going to fix. So, but it's something we have to do today. And the other thing we do as part of the analysis is we geocode the IP threat addresses so that we can create that nice map that I was somewhat making fun of us a few seconds ago. But we do that as well. And we use the maximind geo IP address. And that's what we do. Then there's exhibit creation. Pretty simple. We take all that cleansed data. Once it comes out of the analysis step, we go through, we calculate the summary statistics, we cut it by size of institution, we cut it by month bucket and so forth, and we calculate our Simpson scores. We do a few other things, and then we create a bunch of charts. The period over period trend, the monthly trend, the incident histogram that I showed you, incident by size, a whole set of things. The subway map is one that we just added, and the output is in Excel. Oh, the shame, but it is what we have. And then of course you do the presentation, find the headlines, make the PowerPoint, and write the report. So, and that's its own process. It's actually not that hard, but it's part of the art of it is finding the data that's interesting, trying to weave a narrative around it, and then hopefully conveying it to customers in a persuasive way. So that's a combination of black art and propaganda and exploratory data analysis, and we try to make it more about exploratory data analysis and interesting headlines as opposed to propaganda. So, but that's always part of this. When you're looking at fairly broad brush statistics, you've got to try and make some sense out of it, and so we try to do that. So, Patrick, go ahead.
Do you have an internal peer review process?
We do. So we have the rough draft. Grace typically roughs it out. Sometimes our PR firm takes a whack at it. I'm I'm the principal editor on it. We also run it through our product marketing folks who are pretty honest about this, and then that's how we do it. So sometimes you find things you don't mean to say or expect.
Yeah.
But you got to do the best you can with this. But this is not a scientific peer review.
So for what it's worth, I mean, personally,
Yep.
I've done a lot of stuff like this
Yep.
in medicine. Excel is a useful tool. It just doesn't scale very well.
That's right.
But I have a feeling that Dr. Grace Singh doesn't scale very well either.
She doesn't. Grace does not scale.
Yeah.
She's also about 5'0", so she really doesn't scale. But she doesn't climb walls very well. Yes?
Can you back up one?
This one? One more?
There.
Yeah.
So you're doing false positive triage. Normalization phase, it sounds like. So you're working with atomic events. Are you doing that based on customer rules?
What do you mean by that question?
Well, this is kind of probably oversimplified, but it sounds like you're doing false positive elimination pre-normalization. So you're looking at atomic events, uncorrelated atomic events, unnormalized events. Are you doing that based on customer-defined false positives?
This is false positives from the standpoint of our threshold, right? Which is we want to understand customer comfort. There's a whole set of notes that are typically in all the tickets as well. So there's a lot of contextual information there. I would characterize it as we do this post-normalization. So we have already, the classifications of what the incident was, whether it was an outbreak or reconnaissance or a botnet or command execution, that's already known and been done. The normalization part is really about the threats. That's the key thing that we need to, when we go ahead and normalize the data, the threat information is the key thing we have to tease out. So because different rules, different correlation rules have different names, even though they're referring to the same kind of thing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
It certainly would be easier to do post-normalization as you start to type the classes.
Yep, I agree. Okay, let's see, how are we doing on time? I got about 11 minutes. So what have we learned? This is the fun part. I'm a guy who doesn't like to really stand on too much circumstance here. So I've organized the first two slides according to the traditions of Festivus. And the first one here is the airing of grievances. What have we learned about our process? First is I'm going to piss and moan about Excel, because Excel doesn't make it easy. It doesn't easy to do much more than simple stuff. And that's partly because you're spending a lot of time doing the analysis as a one-off. You're spending a lot of time building exhibits. Everything's a custom job, basically, and that's no fun. So it would be really nice if we could spend a lot less time farting around in Excel and a lot more time doing interesting data explorations. So that's part of my grievance here. The other is that we do have some things, we do have some limitations in our upstream data that has made it a little bit harder. I mentioned that we go through this process where, through a combination of regular expressions and elbow grease, we find out what the actual exploit was, or the threat. That's kind of a pain. Also, this process of weeding out things that, for our purposes of our analysis, really aren't interesting and are false positives. I don't mean false positives in the real false positive sense, but in terms of the analysis, we have some limitations there. It's also probably true when we look at the way we count, right? We've got these level 2 and level 3 incidents that we probably conflate a little bit between things that are likely compromised and things that are really confirmed, like really rock solid. So that's something that we're looking at as well. And if you notice, one of the things that was missing from the analysis is we didn't actually show you anything about the incident types, whether it was a bot or whether it was a scan or whether it was and that's because we just haven't done it yet. So that's something that personally I wish we would do a little bit more of, and we plan to. So now that we've gone to the area of grievances, let's move on to feats of strength and this is really about what we think we're going to be doing in the future. And the first is, we're going to move the data analysis platform to R. How many of you know R or know of it? Okay, a lot of folks. So R is pretty awesome. I probably don't need to convince you of it. It's open source, which is great in and of itself, but it's got a lot of great tools, great ecosystem. One of the things we're discovering is that there's a lot of capability we have to do direct connections to some of the databases to pull down the information, to swirl it around, put it through a blender, and write the exhibits all on an automated basis. I would love to do that because I'm a lazy, industrious person, meaning I'm willing to be industrious because I'm lazy, if that makes any sense. I hate grunt work for the purposes of grunt work. So we're going to try and do this. Exhibits are tricky, though, because if you've ever done any really polished presentation work, you understand that there's kind of what the graph throws at you, and then there's the editing, whether it's tick marks or numbers, or you can have a scatter chart and you can put labels on it and they all cluster together and it looks like a word cloud. So there's all those kinds of things. So we're going to have to see how much of this we can automate, how much we can't. But it would be really nice to do that. And we're going to change some upstream data. So we're adding a level 4 to our existing SIM classification to account for verified compromises with customers. We're going to be hopefully creating some additional encoding so that we can normalize our threat families with something regexable. If we can do this, we're going to decrease our assembly time from about 12 days or thereabouts to hopefully 12 minutes. Here's a sort of a Jobsian, Steve Jobsian type analogy for you. And we're going to try and add additional financial institution data. So number of employees and tenure with us. So in other words, link the customer to how long have they been a customer of ours. Have they been a customer for 15 years and they're still getting popped? Something's not right. You get the idea, right? So there's a lot of things we can do that we haven't done. A couple of ideas, things and I want to get some input on this because we want this to be useful. So, if we add employee information to our data sets, maybe we can come up with compromise rate per 1,000 PCs or some interesting baseline metric like this. I think there's some possibilities with what we can do with the data. Personalized customer benchmarks. If you're customer X, how are you comparing yourself against other customers in our orbit that are similar size? And this will probably work initially just for financial customers because this is what we keep this benchmarking size information on. But if we do it with other customers, which we could do as well, that might be interesting. And then, could you batch generate a report for a customer using R and Knitter, for example? How many folks have used Knitter? Yeah, I know you have. What haven't you used with R at this point? And the other thing, I'm kind of excited about this, although it exceeds my expertise, meaning I'm going to need to take either a graduate course in linear algebra or I'm going to need to fake it, but probably fake it. is can we do what I'm calling a generational analysis? If we take a customer period over period, what's the likelihood that they're going to be better from 1 3-month or 6-month or year period over time? And I think these are Markov chains. How many people know what Markov chains are? Damn, more of you than I was hoping. All right, but I think this is probably what we're going to try to do. So if anybody who actually has some thoughts on this, I would love to chat, because I'm getting out of the shallow end of the wading pool on this one for me personally. And then to Patrick's point, what are we doing about assessing customer impact? Something that we might do here is to add some after-action surveys to collect customer cleanup details and impact. So something we do with every ticket for customers today, and this is outside of our managed security, is every time we have a help desk person talk to a customer, we immediately send them a satisfaction survey right after they hang up the phone and they close the ticket. We typically get a response rate of around, I don't know, I think 10% would be too high, but we get a lot of responses. And anytime there's a negative feedback, we act on it and so forth. Why not do something like this with our security incident tickets, and then go ahead and say, could you tell us, looks like you had a compromise, how many PCs, how long did it take you to clean it up, etc. And even just a little bit of information like that would be really, really interesting, and could help us provide better information both to the field and to our customer base. So that's the deal. We'd love to field some questions, get some ideas, and of course chat afterwards if you want. Yeah.
So I get the goal of the report.
Yep.
Is this report designed to drive some level of change in the industry, and if so, what is that change?
I don't know if we're trying to drive a lot of change, other than to say that we think it's. I will tell you, from a personal standpoint, I have always been very frustrated by the large security companies, and I used to work for one, yellow color, that would come out with these very impressive looking threat reports, amazingly well produced, and they would talk about threats, lots of inputs and no outputs. So how many customers are actually getting affected on a day-to-day basis by all these 50 million malware samples or whatever? So personal agenda, if there is one, is to bring a little more transparency to what large-scale service providers do. And I had drinks probably about 2 years ago out at RSA with I invited the Verizon DVR guys and Jeremiah Grossman from Black Hat and a couple of other folks, and it was sort of called the Data Guys. It was like a drinking thing, and it was like, guys, we've got a lot of critical data. What can we think about collectively? Can we collude? I shouldn't say collude. Can we get together and maybe think about how we could put some data together about customers? And so this is our own little contribution. Something I've thought about is, maybe we anonymize this data and put it out as an open data source. Like as part of OpenIOC or something like that. So, so lots of ideas. Like I said, we're not trying to be. We're not trying to make this more than it is, but we are trying to do our own little bit here. So, yeah, Patrick.
So if you could iterate this faster, if you could iterate this faster, if you could produce it internally once a week, or if you could do cuts for specific companies, or maybe you're doing this already, do you take these data, what you're seeing happening on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, and provide feedback to your customers to help them understand what they need to be doing?
Yeah, we'd like to do that. I think over time we would like to provide customers feedback about how they're doing, and by the transitive property, how we're doing. Because one of the things about, as a vendor, one of the things that you care about is, can you show value to the customer? And particularly in the MSSP case, you're basically, some customers view you as the digital equivalent of the rent-a-guard that is at the front of the hotel that you check into. Others look at you more as a trusted partner. I think being able to provide quantifiable data gets you a little closer to being more of a trusted partner.
May I follow up just quickly?
Yes, and then I'm going to go to the back.
So I'm going to assume that a lot of your customers are members of the FSI SAC, and so they're getting that feed. I'm sorry, Paul, if you can get your exercise, man. Question has to do with membership in FSI SAC and how that works either together or against what you guys are doing.
Probably something we should take offline.
Yeah, because they won't talk about it.
Right. It's a little like Fight Club.
Yeah. Okay.
I was wondering if you collect data on say, false negatives, effectively, the misses that your customers report, and correlate that against your monitoring system or the way you correlate the data?
Fabulous question. We don't have any obvious way of collecting false misses. I think something that I would like to do, and I'm about to get the hook in a sec here, is I would like to see if we can guess at it. Come at it indirectly through things like looking at how many tickets our analysts are processing and see if we have some way of triangulating into what we've missed. It's obviously one of security's biggest problems, right, is how do you know what you've missed? And we might be able to get at it indirectly. So if maybe we could chat afterwards if you've got some ideas. Yeah, one more question, I think, and I think
so
hit it.
I'll go quickly. Looking at the threat list that you had, it looked like the botnet top 10. And we all know that those types of attacks are smash and grab, very quick, very loud. Some of the more, please forgive me, APT type attacks that an attacker might take weeks or months or years to do their reconnaissance. How long do you hold the data for to kind of trend over to look at who's talking to who? Because that's really, to be honest, where the major threats are going to come in.
Yeah, that's a really hard, that's a hard question for me to answer directly. I'm going to try and guess at how long we keep some of the data. I mean, remember that whole log parsing system where we're gathering the hundreds of millions of log events a day and so forth, those are discarded pretty quickly. We don't keep that in long-term storage. We have to get rid of it because it just wouldn't make any sense, and we'd be out of business from a disk space standpoint. We'd be buying so much CapEx. So I suspect there is probably a lot of useful information in some of that raw information, but we don't keep it. So I would say we do, however, keep the key alerting information. One of the things most customers typically ask us for is to alert them on port sweeps. So that kind of information we do keep. So anything that makes its way into the alerting tier and is classified as a level 0, level 1, level 2, level 3, we do keep all the contextual information, and it could probably be useful. But we're not a net VCR. What's the name of the company? Net VCR, is it? Yeah, we're not one. We don't do that. Be nice. If we had infinite disk, we would do it. Okay. Everybody's been a great crowd. Thanks for coming. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you, everyone. Remember to fill out your forms. Wait, don't tell me it's all the way downstairs. The elevators are kind of a race condition, so be careful how you get that down there, but we'll see you down there, and thank you, RJ.